I don't know how comfortable everyone is, but I think if we move closer, it's going to be better, given it's not such a big group. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for coming. So I'm Phyl Georgiou. As I said, the session will focus on kind of selling ideas and getting buy-in. I've never worked in a library, but hopefully I can kind of present this in a way that's really useful to everyone here. We've got a small enough group that hopefully we can be really engaged throughout, not just me presenting. We do have a few exercises on the back end. So let's just start with a bit about me. So I'm from Australia, you can maybe tell from the accent. Moved to Boston 4 years ago to do my MBA at Harvard. And when I was doing my MBA, I decided I want to start a business. And at the time, everyone was making apps, and I thought I should make an app. And in the end, I got a bunch of MBA friends together and got speaking to some of them, and a lot of people talking about the challenges of young children and tablets. And so I ended up starting a company called Tiggly. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about Tiggly now because I'm going to use it as part of the exercise, because a lot of what I've learned about selling ideas has come from Tiggly. But what I want to do, hopefully, is kind of convince you that the things you might think in a business world are similar to how you would pitch almost any idea. So I'm going to try my best to keep it quite generic. And then throughout, if you're asking questions or giving me feedback, we can kind of talk about your specific problems in a library setting. So let's, I missed the part where before I went to Harvard, I worked at a company called McKinsey. It's a global management consulting company, and we do everything with a framework. So I decided to make up a framework for this session. It's a framework that obviously makes sense to me, and we can maybe refine as we talk through it, but I think it's a pretty helpful one. So before we get into that, the prerequisites. So when you kind of come into the session, let's kind of maybe have an idea in our head what this is all about. So first of all, you need to have an idea. And it needs to be an idea you're passionate about and you personally will derive value from. It's not that valuable to have an idea that other people will get value from and you won't. Thirdly, it's an idea other people could be passionate about and could get other people value. Fourthly, you could either execute on the idea and have kind of a unique view of it, or you could be a really important person getting a group together to execute on it. So you need to be central to how the idea is ultimately going to get executed. You have the time and energy to stick through the idea from start to finish. What's important here is that it's not just about the idea, it's actually a lot about you. There's a whole bunch of people who have these cool ideas all the time, but the difference between an idea and kind of ultimately buying and selling it, it's predominantly about you and the group of people you get around you. So you can pretty quickly realize not just a good idea from a bad idea, but an idea that's going to get executed from who's behind it and why they're behind it. Any questions? Maybe we can try and get people involved early on. So then I just want to talk about some different ways to approach this problem, because I'm trying my best to keep this as generic as possible. So one kind of way of thinking about this is I have an idea, but I don't have any resources, I don't have the support, it's just me, I've just come up with an idea, what do I do? So that's the kind of lens of like, I need kind of resources, I maybe need funding, or I need a team. I need to kind of start from the beginning and pull this all together. That's often where ideas start. Sometimes you can be lucky enough actually to have an idea or kind of form part of someone else's idea that already has funding, already has resources, maybe even already has a team. And it's a lot about how do you kind of sell that to your peers, or how do you sell that to your community, or how do you kind of get people involved. We'll try our best to convince you that you still use the same approach in both situations, but obviously the audience is quite different, and what you're pitching and why you're pitching it is different. But again, hopefully this framework still applies. Do people have an opinion on where most of their ideas end up? Is it more kind of, I have the funding, I have everything, I just need people around it? Or it's more like, I'm on my own, I've got an idea, I need to get the resources?
I've made a career of literally having the idea, needing to get the resources. I never have the funds to get started. So I'm always coming from the bottom.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is if you do a really good job of point one, and then your idea needs to, say, get taken to lots of libraries or to your community, then automatically you have a problem at point two. So if you start at the first one, then pretty quickly you might get stuck at the second one, if you're lucky enough to get the resources and so on. Any other comments? Is that generally true that it's normally the first category? All right, so here's the framework, a bit of setting up for the framework. So first of all, there's the idea. And the goal here is engagement, okay? And by that, I mean someone's listening to you. Whether that's the person who's going to give you the resources, whether that's the peers or the library or the community, someone needs to be listening. So the goal here is engagement. So first question is, who's the audience, obviously. But it's really important to realize that what you would say about the idea is completely different depending on who you're pitching it to. And we're going to get into all the nuances about, you know, the different ways to approach that, but it's really critical. And then once you know who that audience is, the question is, what is it about them, you know, that's really inspires them? What kind of emotional things can you tap into? What is it that day to day they worry about, or day to day they wish would happen? And that's how you tap into them. And that's the goal here, is just to get them listening. So you need to figure out the quickest shortcut to get them listening. And you don't always have to. I'm going to probably give you a bunch of examples now where people really think long and hard about what are the kind of positive emotions I can get out of someone, and generally positive emotions are better than negative emotions. But if there's an easy shortcut to negative emotions, like we're all tired, we're all, you know, this is just not working, then people engage because they agree with you. So you can use either one. Sometimes if you're trying to sell a product to millions of people, like I'm trying my best to do, it's much better for me to use positive emotions because I want millions of parents to feel really good about what I'm building. It doesn't work so well in kind of companies to use negative emotions, but I imagine maybe in some of your settings, if you want someone to listen, you just have to agree there's a problem. And knowing how they see the problem versus how you see the problem is really the trick. You might experience the same problem, but they're experiencing it in a different way, and talking to them about it in their lens is going to be the key to that. So I see nodding heads. Does anyone want to add anything? Or? Cool. So we have people listening. Now the question is, how do we create value for them? Because we're trying to sell ideas and get buy-in. Right? This is not about us, it's not about our idea. It's about why they're going to either kind of give us their time or energy or their resources or money or something. So they need to get some value. So again, once you've kind of got them listening, now it's your chance to pitch about why this is great for them. What exactly it's going to change in their day-to-day life. And once you can kind of convince them about that, I'm saying you've got interest. They're not just listening, but they're actually interested. They want to learn more. Final step. This is where the you comes in. I've already kind of said this was coming, which is that really the ultimate kind of trick between interest and buy-in is just about you. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be there from, you know, day and night, start to finish. This is not your 9 to 5, but it needs to be you have a plan. You know how this gets executed. You know you need to get around the table. You know what needs to get done. And my view, and you know, I'm sure everyone has different views on this, is that like humility here is really important, which is like I know where the problem starts. I have a pretty good view of where the problem ends, or I have an idea where my idea kind of works and where it doesn't. And kind of showing that, like knowing where it doesn't work can actually be a really good way to get credibility and people saying, actually this guy knows, or this girl knows what they're talking about. So what is it about you? You know, are you passionate about the idea? What's in it for you? Where's your value? And why will you be able to make this happen rather than anyone else? Why should I be listening to you? I'm interested, there's value here, you've touched into something that's important for me, but like, why should I be having this conversation with you rather than someone else? Do you understand the problem? Do you have a unique perspective? I guess what I don't want to hear is the same thing I've heard 50 times, it's never actually been done. How do I know that this has now got a different kind of energy behind? What's your approach and plan? And quite importantly, do we have alignment? So this is the trickiest one because sometimes you might want to implement the idea in a certain way, but you know, maybe the senior people who are going to give you funding want it done in a different way. This is where you need to say, well, am I going to kind of bend my plan to fit what they want because I want their buy-in? And so in my example, I'll talk more about it later, but we had two types of investors who could invest in our company, the pure like venture capital investors, and then the toy investors, because we make toys. And it was funny because we would write a PowerPoint document for our kind of venture capital investors that said we're going to build this kind of a business. And then toy investors, we tell them we're going to build this kind of a business. And they're really quite different businesses. And we wouldn't sit back and say, what do we want? We would be like, we just need the money, let's figure out. And then when the day comes and we have to choose between the two, we'll then decide what business we want to run. You know, so ultimately aligning yourself is really important. But you know, at some point you have to say, where are my ideals? What do I believe? How do I believe this idea should get implemented? And if there's a huge disconnect between you and the person who you need buy-in, then ultimately this is not going to end up working. And this kind of process, I mean, I'm sure we all have had different types of experiences. This whole process could happen in a day. It could happen over 10 years. And having kind of a view of this whole pipeline from the beginning is really useful, so you know that at the end of 10 years that you're not going to get stuck at the end. But what is nice is that I think pretty much in every situation, there tends to be more than one stakeholder you can pitch the idea to. So kind of finding yourself in the right meetings is quite important. Any comments on the framework or early questions? Yeah.
Isn't it a lot like managing change or change management theory?
Yeah, so I think if you go back to the lenses, I mean, I think when you're pitching an idea to get resources, hopefully you pitch it, it's a small group you're pitching to, maybe, I don't know, some board of directors or something. Hopefully, you know, they're kind of open to new ideas, I hope, and then that's just a small group that you just have to convince about an idea, and your job is to get into their shoes. So I think that's a little bit different, but I think when you've got resources and you're trying to scale something out to libraries or communities or peers, then absolutely it becomes a change management kind of exercise. And that's, I mean, I have a little bit less experience of that in my kind of more recent professional career. I did a bit of that at McKinsey, but then it becomes a little bit harder to figure out what is the general peers consensus on what do they value, who's the audience, how do I align with them, because then you have factions and groups, and so yeah, then once you get into that really complicated big group side, then you do have to weigh a lot of change management ideas. But I think if you're just pitching to a small group trying to get funding, it's a little bit simpler than change management, which can take decades. Any other questions? Comments? Cool. So if you like the framework, then you might want to kind of work backwards and say, I've had an idea for a while, and I wonder if I've been failing at getting engagement, or failing at getting interest, or failing at getting buy-in. Has it been that people haven't really, they've been pretending to listen? Or has it been that people, you know, they've just, you know, I haven't really pitched the value to them very well? Or is it that I'm actually doing everything right, they just don't think I'm the person who should do it? So I can probably, this is more like a work in progress, because I think there's lots of different ways you can approach this question, but you know, is there engagement? You know, if there is engagement, your audience will understand why this idea matters, not just what it is. So you can almost kind of see whether you think they know why you're doing this, not what you're doing. And that's an important distinction that we're probably going to spend quite a bit of time on today. And ultimately, if they resonate with why you're doing it, you'll notice that they listen in a different way. If you feel that, then your issue is not engagement. Interest, I thought the shortest kind of cut to that is you're getting a second and a third meeting. That kind of means people like see something here. They know there's value, they're interested, but probably what they're figuring out is how to actually get it done and whether you're going to help them get it done. And then finally is their buy-in. I mean, you can tell when there is because you've got to the end of it, you've got your resources, you've kind of created some change, you've got all your peers on board. But you still need to look for things like, there's sometimes a catch, which is you might get the money or you might get that kind of high-level funding, but you're not getting the energy or the passion or the enthusiasm from people. So that can be a really tricky situation where you think you've got full buy-in, where you've got a lot of the resources you need, but then ultimately you realize that there are other things kind of undermining you that you thought you would have, like their ongoing support, or their ongoing energy, or their ongoing prioritization of what you're trying to do. Questions or comments? All right, so this is where I talk about me a bit more. So Tiggly. Had anyone heard of Tiggly before I showed up? That's good. I wish that was the general population of America. 20% of America knew about Tiggly. Cool, so, and now, I don't know if there was much information about me, but actually it's better if you know less about Tiggly today. Normally you should know everything about Tiggly. So let me just tell you a bit about Tiggly. So that's our packaging. And first of all, I'm going to pretend like you guys are my consumers. So my audience today is you as consumers. I know at least one of you has a 2-year-old. Does anyone else have 2 to 6-year-olds? Okay, cool. I have real consumers out there. So that's our packaging. And at Tiggly, we are reimagining classic play. We make learning toys for the iPad. I think I got polite nods because really I think your reaction is like, what? I'm really confused. Because we spent a lot of time making that packaging, and we spent a long time telling people at dinner parties or whatever that we're reimagining classic play, we make learning toys for the iPad. And what we realized was that the natural reaction of people was like, what? Like, I don't get it. Like, and to us, it's like, well, that's what we do every day. I don't have any other way of describing what I do other than I make learning toys for the iPad, so you should just get it. But ultimately, people don't get it, right? And I'm sure you've all had situations, even maybe where you try and explain what a librarian does every day, and people might just not really get it. So let's try again. So children are growing up in an increasingly digital world. Tablets are everywhere, slowly replacing real-world play. At Tiggly, we believe physical play is critical to early childhood development, and we don't want it to be lost on this and future generations. So we decided to make learning toys. A few things. First of all, I've told you a story, more of like a why I'm doing it, right? And hopefully your reaction now is more like, okay, I still don't know what you do, but that sounds interesting, like tell me more. Before you were probably still going to say tell me more, but that was just more out of politeness rather than anything else. Now you're actually, hold on, this is interesting. I might not agree with everything you say there, or I might not love the fact that the world's becoming digital, but I kind of like where you're going. And to be honest, part of the reason I'm doing this session is that we can keep refining this because we're really struggling with how we tell our story. But what we know, what we've learned from kind of suffering, is that that packaging wasn't working because people would see an iPad and toys and be like, I don't get it, rather than I get it. And as soon as we took the iPad off the packaging, we've seen customer reactions much more positive. Not reactions from people who know our product. People who know our product are like, why don't you put the iPad on? Why don't you put the iPad on? Why don't you put the iPad on? Because they know how it works. But the people who don't know how it works react better without the iPad. And that lost us a lot of money to figure that out.
Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that cost a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't tell the person you're trying to get buy-in on. Yeah, so, and that's the funny thing is one of my creative director actually said this in a meeting once. He said, you know, we always say we make learning toys for iPad. What happens if we just said we make learning toys? And obviously they work on iPads because all the kids are using iPads. All of a sudden we like reframed it to like, obviously they work on iPads. And then all of a sudden people are like, yeah, of course they should work on iPads, even though they're still like a bit confused. They're now kind of with you on the train of thought. All right, so now we're kind of at the point of engagement, is my argument. People are listening. They don't know what you're doing yet, really. They don't know what's in it for them yet, but they're actually listening rather than just politely saying, oh, tell me more. And throughout this, I'll tell you a little bit more about Tiggly, and if you guys can help me have a really emotional story about my brand, that'd be awesome. All right, so has anyone heard of Hubba? German wooden toy company. So a lot of kind of specialty stores sell their wooden toys. They're pretty much the biggest wooden toy company in Europe, particularly in Germany. So Tiggly was trying to raise money. We make learning toys for iPads. And we were pitching to like your classic venture capitals, the guys who invest in Facebook and Snapchat and all those guys. And we're like, hey, we make these toys, but we make apps and they interact, and we need a few $1 million. And so for us, it was really understanding what makes a venture capitalist tick. And you wouldn't be surprised to guess that they just want 100x returns. They want $1 billion valuations. So to them, we had to sell our product. We had to tell them our company's a platform company. In other words, the toys are just kind of a gimmick. We're just going to get people into our brand and scale and scale and scale and have millions of apps. And people are just going to think of Tiggly like they think of, Sesame Street, and it's just going to be this big kind of merchandise here and apps there and toys there and this, that. And that's what a VC wants to hear you do, right? So we told them that's what we wanted to do. And we convinced ourselves, actually, we confused ourselves at one point about what we wanted to do because we were really in the mind frame of they're our audience and what they want to hear is this. And then we all, at the same time, met Hubba at a toy fair, and we then realized we had to make a totally different presentation for a 75-year-old wooden toy company that's family owned. And so, what do you tell someone, how do you get someone interested who's the premier German wooden toy manufacturer, right? Well, what you convince them is that in 2020 they're going to be an increasingly irrelevant wooden toy manufacturer, and they're essentially going to miss the digital boat, just like Kodak. Now, that's what I'm telling you guys. That's obviously not how we presented it to them, but that was the mind frame we had in our presentation, which is that digital is coming. And you wouldn't be surprised to know that they weren't shocked by what we told them. It wasn't like we were educating them. And that's important whenever you're trying to get interest and engagement. It's a lot harder to do when you're trying to teach the person something. It's much easier to do to tap into a paranoia or an emotion or an excitement or something that already exists. So we didn't have to tell them digital was coming. We just had to kind of reinforce it and make it feel in a way that we're going to hold their hand through that. And have enough confidence to tell a 75-year-old company that, that we can help them navigate something different. We can't make better wooden toys than them, but we can do something else that they can't do. And then you can also tap into other things, like you're in some tiny town in Germany, we're in New York City. And we're like in this like ecosystem of digital and physical kind of coming together. And do you want to miss that boat? So ultimately we were convinced them to invest in us, so now we have more than $10 in our bank account, which is nice. But it also ultimately then helped us then go back to our business plan and say, all right, now we have a partner, now let's kind of think about what we want to do, given that their expertise, their support, their resources. So. Any questions? I'm sure you're still wondering exactly what Tiggly does. All All right, so sorry, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, which is before, by telling the story, we just had interest. We actually hadn't got to the point of buying, right? And so remember the difference between interest and buying is believing not just that digital's coming, but that you're the group to do it. So it's the things like, we have a track record, our product sells in Apple retail stores. You know, we did this with no money. You know, a couple of us from Harvard Business School, things like that. Also, innovation, ideas, foresight. We know what's coming. We have new products. We can kind of see the future. We've really thought about this. We have a plan. And as I was saying before, this kind of humility, clear sense of limitations. The first thing I ever did for Tiggly was I said, I'm not a creative person. I need to hire a creative director, someone who can actually draw things and create apps. And so that's what they probably want to see from any Harvard Business School person, you know, and that's often the issue Harvard Business School people have going into new industries is everyone's like, why the hell are you here? You're just trying to like scam or whatever and create a business where this is something else. So you need to be able to say, actually, I knew from day one that I wasn't the important part of this business. We needed this person, that person, this person. Alignment, this is kind of along the lines of not only that they wanted to go into digital, but they believe in something about children's education. They believe in, you know, imagination and kind of creativity. And so we also believe in those things. Now, you can fake some of that, but after meeting 20 times, people start seeing through that. Alignment like, you know, products need to be high design, safety. You know, a lot of this stuff's obvious, but sometimes just kind of reiterating it makes everyone feel like they're doing this together. Growth plan, passion, commitment, unique positioning. So these are the kind of things we used. You can use a whole lot of different tactics, but these are the tactics when we were getting meeting number 2, meeting number 3, meeting number 4. We had interest. There's no doubt these guys were trying to get into digital. We had to execute on why they had to choose us and not someone else. Because of course, if they choose someone else, not only do you not get the money, but then your competitor get the money. So obviously in the business situation, you're very worried about competitors. I don't know, in a library situation, you may be a little less so.
You shouldn't be less so in a library situation. It's part of the problem, maybe, for the library situation.
In the sense that everyone's trying to do the same thing, or?
In the sense that they don't realize that there are competitors like Google and Amazon
Oh, right.
and groups that are doing information commodification.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it's always good to think broadly. Like, when you said competitors, I just thought other libraries or something, but it does make sense to think of competitors in a very broad sense.
Just because with public good doesn't mean that it's going to stay public good. If it's underfunded and other things come in, they can do some of the things that we were doing.
Yeah.
More effectively.
And it's kind of having that mindset, which can hopefully, you know, if you're trying to say pitch to someone more senior or like board of directors, it's kind of, that's their, hopefully their mindset. And so if you can tap into their mindset about thinking big picture, thinking, like, I understand the problem. This is not just, you know, a micro my library problem. This is actually a bigger problem that I know you think about, and I've thought about it on your level. And then all of a sudden, that's kind of like the engagement interest level. Okay, so now we can get into maybe watching the odd YouTube video and an exercise. I've got no sense for how my time's going. Cool.
I think we go through 10:15.
Yep. I've got one session that's an hour and 15, one that's an hour, so we'll see how I figure that out. Has anyone seen the TED Talk about why not what? Okay. I'll show a clip from it. This is where you can start seeing that I've stolen some ideas, but this has been watched 19 million times, so you know, you're better off hearing from him than me. But this is a TED Talk about, it's about the engagement topic, and it's essentially about why, if you're pitching a business, if you're pitching an idea, if you're pitching a project, if you're trying to be a leader in any sense, the best approach is to tell people why you're doing it and not what you do. And we'll probably watch a couple of minutes of it.
How do you explain when others are able to achieve things? to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle.
Is this loud enough?
Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message to them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You ready to buy a computer from me? All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat-screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat-screen TVs. They've been making flat-screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. And Dell came out with MP3 players and PDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products, and nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day.
Cool, so this is 18 minutes. I don't know if you found it interesting. It's a good one to watch. And he goes through a whole set of things. Obviously, I think he spends most of his time thinking about organizations, but he talked a while about Martin Luther King. And essentially, he kind of said, why do you think everyone showed up to that, famous Martin Luther King speech? And ultimately, he said it wasn't about Martin Luther King. It was about each person there and identifying with a cause. And so that's where you get into this question of like, how do you get someone engaged, interested, and buy-in so that it's actually about them and not about what you're doing. And I haven't kind of worked in your context, but I think you can really extrapolate that beyond just businesses, beyond consumers, beyond raising money from toy companies or venture capitalist firms. It's something that applies every day. And you get into trouble when you spend all your time talking about what you do. Make learning toys for iPad. That doesn't inspire people. But what inspires people is tapping into an emotion, a why, something that has value for them. Any comments, questions, thoughts? So I thought maybe we do have a bit of time, so why don't we, not all of you heard of Tiggly, but when I say Lego for girls, where the objective is to construct things that appear in an accompanying picture book, who's that?
The chick blocks, I can't think of what they're called though.
Friends, Lego friends.
No, not Lego Friends.
No, it's the, I can't think of what it's called.
Is it the
It's such a great
Goldilocks?
name.
Goldilocks, yeah.
Yes, there you go.
Goldilocks, yeah. So if we have time at the end, I'll try to show you some of these videos, but that's what Goldilocks builds. They build these kind of like, female-friendly Lego blocks kind of thing. But while that kind of thing sounds sort of interesting, your reaction is, yeah, Lego does it, or blah, blah does it.
But I know what girls like. Seldom.
Yeah, well, the way, she just turns it on her head by saying, look, I'm a female engineer, and I was the only female engineer in my Stanford class. Don't you want your girl to be an engineer? Or wouldn't you want your girl to at least think about being an engineer? And that's why she built her company. And that's why they got a Super Bowl ad and all these things that they ended up getting. Raising $250,000 on Kickstarter. And I'm not sure how much they're succeeding, but they've got a huge amount of engagement. And for example, just like a metric that I care about is, I see whenever they do something in a marketing standpoint, everyone shares it on Facebook. Even my friends who are, say 28, don't have kids, don't have a daughter, but they're just passionate about the cause. And because they might not even buy one of her toys, they might not even know anyone to buy the toy for, but they care about why she's doing it. And that's, how you go viral. Unfortunately, our product hasn't yet figured out that catch yet. We can go into that forever, but we're well aware of, when you really tap into something that's kind of sitting in someone's stomach that's annoying them, they haven't been able to articulate it, and you come in and articulate it for them, and then give them a package that solves it. That's how you get, sell ideas and get buy-in. It doesn't have to be a company, it could be anything. It could be a political idea. How often do you hear politicians actually talking about what they want to do? I mean, whenever the politician starts talking about what they want to do, you stop listening. Most of the time politicians are saying, vote for me because I'm not a Republican, or vote for me because I'm not a Democrat. And so that's more tapping into you being a Republican or being a Democrat. And so probably 90% of everything that goes on in political campaigns is, you're this kind of a person, we have these kind of dreams, join me. I want to help the middle class. How I do it doesn't matter to you, right? But I want to help the middle class. And how about create a systematic and extensive library of tutorial videos?
I'm going to say lynda.com.
No, I mean, I shouldn't ask you guys because you might know millions of these guys. This is how I describe the Khan Academy.
Yes.
And I don't know if anyone saw the video that the Khan Academy did recently. I'm going to show that because I really like that one. So if this is your what, I mean, have a think about what emotional, maybe everyone should just spend 30 seconds while I get this YouTube up thinking about, if you run the Khan Academy and you were trying to just make people love you like we love Apple, what emotional thing would you tap into? How would you kind of tap into how would you get a YouTube video shared on Facebook? Does anyone have any ideas, you can share them, but.
Making learning accessible.
Yeah?
Didn't he talk to Bill and Melinda Gates?
Sorry?
Didn't he talk to Bill and Melinda Gates? Didn't their children use the Khan Academy?
Yeah, I think they did. But what is that? So that's an interesting, people know Bill and Melinda Gates, they know that that's a good cause. But how do you tap into, can you tap into that and make, why do I care? How do I care about that, right? So you need to figure out.
Well, I thought if it's good enough for his kids, it's probably good enough for mine.
Yeah.
I just like tapping into, and I'll talk about this a little bit in my keynote tomorrow, is just the whole idea of what if, and trying to get people to think of what if we lived in a world where everyone had access to high quality, free education? What if that was all at your fingertips, anytime, anywhere? You know, what if a child in China could learn the exact same thing as a child in Britain, and what if you could do it together? I mean, I would try to, like, you know, that would be the way that I would maybe picture just, you know, this whole idea that, you know, education wants to be free and that everyone should have access, and it should be on demand all the time for anyone, anywhere.
Yeah, accessible, emotional, accessible, open, global. Let's see what they actually did. Sorry that I don't have this ready. I didn't have enough time to set all that.
Nobody's born smart. We all start at zero. Can't talk, can't walk, certainly can't do algebra. Adding, reading, riding a bike. Nobody's good at anything at first. There was a time when Einstein couldn't count to 10. And Shakespeare had to learn his ABCs just like the rest of us. Thankfully, we're born to learn. Slowly, surely, you stumble, slip, crawl, fall, and fail and fall. Frustrating, confusing, trying, struggling, until one day, you walk. One foot in front of the other, one idea on top of the next. Each wrong answer making your brain a little bit stronger. Failing is just another word for growing, and you keep going. This is learning. Knowing that you'll get it, even if you haven't gotten it yet. Because the most beautiful, complex concepts in the whole universe are built on basic ideas that anyone, anywhere, can understand. Whoever you are, wherever you are, you only have to know one thing. You can learn anything.
So yeah, any thoughts on that compared to what we were talking about?
You know, I like how they really played up the emotion of like aspiration, right? That we all start from nothing, but we can be anything, and you kind of see that evolve in a minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
They didn't even tell you what they did,
No.
which is why.
Yep.
Like, if you didn't know what Khan Academy was, you'd watch that and still have no idea what it was.
Yeah.
But
And is
you'd
that,
be interested.
yeah, you'd be interested. I mean, it's interesting to think, like, do you, you know, I think for us, we still say, you know, we believe the world should be physical, and, you know, we think that, you know, kids love tablets, but, you know, motor skills, spatial skills. So we make learning toys. Like, we still sometimes feel the need to tell what we do. Goldilocks also, they'll talk about all this engineering movement, but then they'll still say, this is what we do. So it depends what stage of life you're at. You know, Apple doesn't need to really talk about what they do anymore. They're really lucky. They just take beautiful pictures and put it on a poster. But you know, Khan Academy is probably advanced enough that, and they do a good enough job with that video that you will still try and figure out what they do. And even if you don't, you might still share it on Facebook. That's what's cool about it, right? Is that you might still actually share that. I mean, I think what I found now that I watched it again after hearing what you guys just said, talking about the like Melinda Gates and their kids. I mean, what they used there was Einstein and Shakespeare, which I think made it really, like, it kind of really hit home in a way that was like, you know, I'm not Einstein, but I could still learn anything. And so what they did was they made it about me somehow. I don't know if you each felt that it was actually a little bit about you. And it's not about, you know, someone far away or helping some kid in Africa, or this is actually just relevant to me. And then I still extended that to being, wow, this must be relevant to so many people. But they somehow tapped into me with that 1 minute 30, when I've never personally ever thought of using Khan Academy, probably never will. But for the minute 30 I was watching it, I'm like, yeah, maybe I should learn something. And that's a hard thing to do, but they did it. And I don't think that it wasn't like, it was pretty nicely done, but it wasn't the world's highest budget thing, you know. And, you know, they used a few little tricks like camera at the kids' level and things that engage you, but you know, those are just marketing tricks.
It's very Western though. and it's very, and what it taps into is racial algebra. It's the bootstrap, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, which wouldn't work in all cultures, but for our culture, it resonates. And I think in most Western cultures, it resonates. But it'd be interesting to look at how that same message would work in a non-Western culture and whether it would work. Because part of what makes it shorthand is that it is tapping into this whole ethos and this whole kind of cultural messaging that we've been brought up with.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, can Goldilocks sell their, children, girls engineering in the Middle East or something, I don't know.
Right.
But yeah, this is the example of like, if you really spend a lot of time understanding your audience, and not always just, because that's what the point that, now I've forgotten the guy's name, the guy who had the TED Talk, the point that he makes is that like, what you do is so easy to explain, and that's why we shorthand to it. That's why maybe when you do a proposal, the first question is, what are you planning on doing? And so often you get forced into the first paragraph you ever write about your idea is what you're going to do. No one ever, the first question of a proposal is never like, tell me why you're even writing anything. It's always, what do you plan to do? How much money do you need? And then maybe you can squeeze the why in somewhere. Because the what's easy to assess and look at and understand, but the why, you really need a unique view of your audience.
Well, and you need an audience that has a basic understanding, which is one of the real challenges. I mean, that's what you're hitting right now as a challenge, is that you don't have something easy to access. So you can't use shorthand nearly as effectively as, say, Khan Academy just did.
Yeah, so that's a bigger topic of, if you say, could think of any idea or any business, a good trick is to start on one that already has this movement. So if it depends where you're starting from. If you're starting from a blank slate and you're like, I want a project or I want a business, then you can work backwards and say, for example, everyone's talking about kids coding now, like, how can I create a company that teaches kids to code? And then there's shorthand for it, you tap into it. A lot of parents are thinking about that. I don't know, in the library situation, it might be that people are thinking a lot about technology access, so you just tap into that because that's what everyone's talking about. But there might be something on the horizon that you know is there, like the issue that we're dealing with, which is that toys are getting less play. But the problem is we're hitting the market at a time when parents are just so apprehensive about the iPad that you say anything about the iPad and they step back. So very open to admitting that we're struggling not because we don't understand the problem, but we understand that our time's too early, and that's a whole different challenge that I don't necessarily want to get into here, but maybe there is a final slide of my whole presentation, which is like, if you didn't get buy-in at the end, maybe you just need to wait a little bit. Maybe your idea's too early. I mean, you need to be careful to not, sometimes ideas need to go in the scrap heap, right? A lot of people waste a lot of resources and energy investing in ideas that are just not getting buy-in because they're not good ideas. But that, it's tough to differentiate between a not a good idea and an idea whose time hasn't come. So.
What I found in my experience in libraries is that sometimes your idea can be not necessarily a bad one, but just too big for right now. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned is that sometimes when you can't get buy-in at a very global level, that sometimes it makes sense to scale back and see if there's a way that you can implement what would be a good idea on a smaller scale, and use that as a way to pilot test like the bigger idea. Mm-hmm. And it's the whole like the Pinto versus the Cadillac, right? Yeah. You shoot for the Cadillac first, but if you can't buy the Cadillac up front, you go and make a Pinto, and then maybe you can paint the picture of, now we have the Pinto and it functions, here's why you want the Cadillac. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's staging your asks and kind of getting buy-in to things that are palatable, absolutely. For us, what we've our shorthand to all this is that, if it's tough to really convince someone on the internet to buy a product, maybe they just need to see a live demonstration. Maybe once you actually see a kid playing with that toy, we think that's by far the best demonstration of, outcome. Is that scalable? We're figuring that out. But what is the small scale project you can achieve that can essentially shine a light on the big topic, right? But if you're Goldie blocks, you can just tap right into it. And I mean, I do like what they do. Just jealous.
If it makes you feel any better, I'm a youth services librarian, and we have iPads that people can use in the library.
Yeah.
And we bought Tiggly shapes.
Oh, yeah?
They love them.
Good.
They try them. I've actually used them in story times in a program, and we kind of showed them to the parents and just kind of let the kids play with the parents.
Yeah, it shouldn't come across so depressed,
Over
right?
the moon. Yeah, I'm like, it's okay. You're taking we don't have Goldie blocks, but we have Tiggly, so.
That's good. Well, we've got Tiggly counts now. You should buy Tiggly counts.
Yeah, we will. I just saw that.
Well, even though you're not looking for advice right now, school libraries, public libraries may not give you a ready market because a lot of parents who are bringing their children to public libraries, not all, but it's not necessarily the market segment that's going to have iPads ready to use. But with school libraries, especially private school libraries, if you can get the kids using them in the libraries, then they go home and they ask their parents for them. And in the preschools, and in the, if you can do it at those lower levels in some of the more, I don't know if you guys are already working on any of that, but if you can get them demonstrated at that level by teachers.
Yeah, no, I think that's what we're planning. Like, it's a small team and so on, but that is a goal, and I think good advice. I don't know if you guys have heard of Sphero. Do you know Sphero? Yeah. Sphero kind of gave us the advice that they couldn't really sell in stores until they went to schools and went to libraries, and then the demand went the other way. But yeah, obviously the first time you have a product idea, you think it's so great that you just try and get it in consumers' hands, and out of nowhere Apple said, hey, let's put it on the shelf. So we're like, all right, let's go. But it's a really hard game. Consumers are the hardest people to pitch to, I think. Cool. So any questions at this point? We can try run an exercise for a little bit.
Are you going to tell us what, for those of us that don't know what Tiggly is?
All right, I'll show you guys a quick video. But you'll see we haven't done our, this is where you see you can give me real advice, because we haven't done our, the reason why I've seen so many of these videos recently, I've been watching everyone's and saying like, we should do a video like that. So we haven't quite got to our emotional video yet. This will just give you an example of our latest product. It's called Tiggly Counts, teaches kids how to count. So Tiggly Shapes and Tiggly Counts come with 3 free apps, cost $30. And the theory is that physical play, like particularly counting, we think learning how to count on an iPad is not as effective as learning how to count with blocks. But actually, if you put the two together, you can find this really interesting combination. In the sense that, you might not know what 3 is, but when you put the 3 rod on, 3 things come out. That can only really happen when you're playing physical and digital at the same time. And then the 3 and the 1 line up to look like the 4. So we've taken kind of Cuisenaire rods and said, what do they look like in the digital age? And Tiggly Shapes is just a set of shapes that also work with 3 apps. Again, you don't really understand what a square is on an iPad because you can't feel its 4 sides. And then if someone gives you a square as a 2-year-old, unless the parent's there reinforcing that that's a square, you don't really get reinforced that it's a square. So putting the two together is really powerful. Hopefully we're going to have like a music game coming out and then a alphabet game coming out, because we think there's a whole set of early learning curriculums that motor skills, spatial skills, physical play, that's what really concretizes the learning. Any other questions on Tiggly? Yeah, Tiggly.com. Hopefully a memorable name. That's the one thing we got right.
Hopefully you bought some of those toys with you so we can break out the iPads and play with them.
You know, I actually wasn't that organized.
I want to touch the Tiggly, man.
Yeah.
I
can just call them the shapes.
The shapes?
The shapes.
I do feel bad that I didn't bring them, but...
So,
You got it.
and the apps for Android are coming out later this
Yeah, we're working on Android.
Okay.
It's one of my grey hair moments, but yeah, not all Android tablets are as good as recognizing all the different Alright, so I was going to do a bigger exercise, but maybe we were kind of running out of time. I mean, does anyone who has some like ideas in their head that we can discuss maybe as a group? I don't know if that's too much, but we can kind of work on them together, or any questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that a lot of libraries are